Paul? Yeah. Okay, I think we'll be starting soon. Excuse me, Paul. Oh, sorry. Hello, everybody. We're going to get going soon. We'd love Good to see you. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the session at Word Vancouver on After the First Book. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that this festival takes place on the unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. Word Vancouver would like to take a moment to thank our generous donors and sponsors. We would like to give a special thank you to SFU and the Writers Studio for this wonderful space and their and their continued generous support of Word Vancouver. We'd also like to thank the Canada Arts Council, the Canada Book Fund, the Canada Heritage Fund, Canada Periodical Fund, the BC Arts Council, BC Gaming, Creative BC, the City of Vancouver, DBVIA, the Joseph Wask Family Foundation, the Hamber Foundation, the BC and Yukon Book Prizes, the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop, CWILL, Pace and Associates, the Crime Writers Association, the Federation of BC Writers, the Surrey Library, the Vancouver Public Library, the League of Canadian Poets, and the Writers Union of Canada, and many more. For a full list of our partners, please visit our website. Without you, this festival could not happen. If you haven't already done so, please consider making a donation via our website. Hello, everybody. My name is Andrew Chesham. I am the director of the Writers Studio here at SFU Continuing Studies. On behalf of the Writers Studio, SFU, and our creative writing community, it's my pleasure to welcome you to Word Vancouver and this panel discussion on life after the first book. I'm joined by Gurjinder Basran, Claudia Casper, Raoul Fernandes, and Paul Headrick. I'll give each writer a full introduction soon, but first the format. We'll have a reading from each panelist, about 2 or 3 minutes long, and the readings will be scattered throughout the event. After each reading, we'll ask a question for the reader, for the rest of the group, for the reader and the rest of the group to answer. At the end, we should have time for audience questions. So if there's anything you want to ask that comes up, we'll have time for it. Before we begin, though, I would like to take a moment to frame the conversation. We're here to discuss the first book, that glorious accomplishment. It's something that comes up often in the Writers Studio. Many students are working towards their first publication, whether it's a short piece or a full manuscript. And we're regularly discussing the realities of having your work in the world. What sometimes comes up, but not always, is the fact that we put a lot of pressure on ourselves for that first publication. to have our book on the shelf next to our literary heroes. For many, understandably, it's a symbol of accomplishment because it is an accomplishment, a great one. Your first book is often the culmination of years of determination and a sign that the writer has made it and that they can now confidently assert that they are truly and indubitably a writer. I'll be clear right now. This isn't a talk about how to secure an agent or get a six-figure advance from Penguin Random House. What I'm interested in, and what I hope would be most helpful to you, our attendees, is discussing how publishing a book does and does not change a person's life. Specifically, I want to know how it changed these writers' lives. Did their lives in fact change? Or have their lives largely stayed the same? Was their book launch as amazing as they thought it would be? What was life like after that? Did all the anxieties they had before publishing just wash away? Was there a moment when they finally felt their work was solidly, immovably embedded in the literary pantheon? I'd like to know. Of course, we can talk about the logistics and the technical details of being published, but I also want to know how perceptions shift or don't. What becomes easier and what becomes harder, both mentally and in terms of craft. I feel there's a pressure that exists in the literary field that doesn't necessarily exist elsewhere. Of course, I expect it exists in academia and other creative fields like music or the visual arts or even glassblowing. But I feel there's a pressure that exists for writers that doesn't, I expect, exist for HR managers or accountants. This is what I see as the pressure, the need, but it feels more like a requirement. The need to produce things in the field in which you work or teach, or maybe you're just passionate about. Here's what I mean. I am the director of a creative writing program, the Writer's Studio, here at SFU. Yet, I have not written a book. I've worked in literary arts for 16 years. I've worked for publishers. I've published short pieces, edited anthologies, and with my colleague Laura Farina, who's here, hi, I recently edited a book on the craft and life of publishing called Resonance. But I have no other books to my name. For me, this is a source of shame. Not having a novel or a book or short stories or a memoir, especially since the two directors before me, Betsy Worland and Wade Compton, were both highly accomplished writers with multiple publications in multiple genres. I have a friend who is an elevator technician. He builds and repairs elevators. Our kids play together. He asked me one day, "You work in creative writing. Does that mean you write?" After thinking about my reply for a moment, I said, "You know, it's weird. I do write, and I'm working on a novel. But I feel such pressure. Maybe it's a sense of urgency about writing it. I feel like I need to have a book so I don't feel like an imposter. So I can expel this feeling that I don't deserve to work in the field that I have, in the field in which I work, or have the position that I have." Do you, I ask him, feel any sort of pressure when you come home? Like when you come home, do you feel the need to practice the art of elevator making? Do you feel required at night after the kids have gone to sleep to make your own elevator? He laughed. No, of course I don't. Of course he doesn't. Why would he feel pressure to make his own elevator? Why should any of us feel pressure to do anything? Why do we put expectations on ourselves? Why do we feel we have to make things? Is it so we don't feel like imposters? That's the type of thing I want to talk about. What are these pressures that we feel? How do they affect the creation of your first book and subsequent publications? I mean, what has life been like for these authors after their first book? So, with that, I will start with Raoul Fernandes.
All right. Thank you all. Oh, you're going to do that?
Yeah, I'll read your bio. Raoul Fernandes lives with his wife and two sons on the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. His first collection of poems, Transmitter and Receiver, from Nightwood Editions in 2015, won the Dorothy Livesay Award and the debut Litzer Award for Poetry, and was a finalist for the Gerald Lampert Memorial Award and the Canadian Authors Association Award for Poetry. He has been published in numerous literary journals and anthologies, including the Best of Canadian Poetry in 2017. Welcome, Raoul.
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate the introduction. It's so great to be here to, yeah, come on. Oh, okay. um, I was talking with another author upstairs about uh, the joy of being able to have work alive in a room in the air, which I haven't got to do very much during COVID. And I know this talk will be mostly about having a book, but there's something really precious about a poem or a piece of work existing in the air and having this direct communication. So I'm very honored to be able to do that with you. This is the first poem in my book, and I feel like it was one of those poems that I wrote that, even though the book doesn't have a clear theme, it has a number of themes maybe running through it. This is a poem I wrote that I felt kind of crystallized what I wanted the book to do. Um, it's called By Way of Explanation. You have this thing you can only explain by driving me out to the port at night to watch the towering cranes move containers from ship to train. Or we go skipping stones across the mirror of the lake, a ghost ship and a bottle of blue Bombay gin by your side. I have this thing I can only explain to you by showing you a pile of computer hardware chucked into the ravine. We hike down there, and blackberry vines grab our clothes as if to say, "Stop, wait. I want to tell you something too." You have an old photograph you keep in your bedside drawer. I have this song I learned on my guitar. By way of clarification, you send me a YouTube video of a tornado filmed up close from a parked car, or a live stream from a public camera whose view is obscured by red leaves. I cut you a key to this room, this door. There's this thing, a dictionary being consumed by fire, the two of us standing in front of a Rothko until time starts again. A mixtape that is primarily about the clicks and hums between songs. What if we walk there instead of driving? What if we just drive without a destination? And there's this thing I've always wanted to talk about with someone. And now, with you here, with you listening, with all the antenna raised, I no longer have to. I'll read one more poem. This is kind of a poem about books, it's a way. It's also about having a new child and a way I work through maybe some of the anxieties and hopes and dreams for my first child, who's now 10. If you want to date things, it's called Books for the New Child. A book where a mountain appears overnight next to a village, and all the villagers are too afraid to climb it, except for the animals and the children. A book where your father and mother are planets, and you are a moon orbiting each of them in turn, and sometimes you comet away into space, a slight angle in your trajectory. A book of the world that existed before you. A man's hat blows off in a gust of wind before you. A woman washes her face in a stream before you. A cat holds a goldfinch in its mouth before you. A book on how to responsibly operate and maintain your alphabet. A book that runs on solar power, or runs on your mother playing the piano in the other room, or on your own breathing, or on your own eyes upon the page. A book that's folded into an origami crane. You don't want to open it up. No, you want to, but know that it will never fold back into the same bird. A book where no mention is made of money. A book where the stars are reachable with an ordinary stepladder and the ocean is a postman who comes right up to your front gate and no mention is made of money. A book about the animals that are so kind that they do not eat each other and live on sunlight and flowers in a meadow, but they are always hungry, and the book is small enough to fit in your chest pocket, and the book is thick enough to absorb a bullet. A book that explains the stages of the Earth's water cycle in detail and what that teaches us about love. A book about an elephant that wants to live at the bottom of the ocean and what that teaches us about love. A dream dictionary which won't ever be read, but whose pages are fed into the fireplace through the winter. a book about you that I'm holding in my hands right now, this late evening, pages, pages blank as the moon sailing across the whole length of our window. Thank you for listening, guys.
Raoul, my question we're going to do a question that Raoul will answer, then we'll open up to the larger panel. What did you think it would be like to have a book published? What did you think life as a published author would be like? And how were those expectations met, or what differed?
Okay. So most of my writing time, I wasn't really thinking about a book. I was going poem by poem. I was just wanting to be a better poet, and kept working on my craft. It was when I joined the writer studio that I decided to kind of take myself seriously as a writer. I started like even introducing myself as a poet, which I couldn't do before. um, and I relate a lot to that feeling of the imposter syndrome, where I didn't feel like a real writer, um, and then and even though the writer studio helped with that, it still felt like I was like, well, I'm a writer, but I'm not yet published, so I'm not quite a writer yet. So I felt I felt that having a book would make me feel like a writer, and in a lot of ways, it did. It made me feel like I have this thing, like this physical object that I can say this is something done that I did, and it's out in the world, and it's having a life of its own, um, and that helped a lot in terms of like maybe what I was struggling with in terms of my identity as a writer. Um, that said, I don't think it. I think I still feel that imposter syndrome. It didn't completely clear it up, and there were things that happened after the book that sort of helped boost it again. Like I don't have much of an ego, but like things that like helped, like winning a few awards and getting some nice reviews and just having people tell me the poems they like and stuff like that helped. I think I'm trailing off in terms of the questions, but is there the expectations?
Yeah, and how are they
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah, I mean, I also feel like after the writer studio and through the writer studio in a way, I got very connected with a community of poets, and at various stages in their careers. Um, and I could see what was happening with poets that had just got their book published. One friend of mine, Kayla Zaga, had got her book published like the year before me, and it was through the same publisher that I got accepted through. So I was kind of like paying attention to what was happening with her. I'm like, oh, these are the kind of things you're doing after having a book. These are the places you're getting invited to. These are the awards you're being like, look, they're considered for. So I kind of had this sense of like, oh, this is kind of like a path that might happen, um, with seeing the people in my community and what they were going through. And yeah, I feel like I've talked a lot. I'm gonna see what these wonderful writers have to say.
Anybody wants to?
I really relate. I think that first book was about being able to claim that I was a writer. Prior to writing it, I'd never written anything, not a poem, not a short story, and I'd had nothing published. I came into the writer's studio with 20 pages and an idea. Thankfully, Betsy Worland saw something and accepted me into the studio. Um, and while I was writing, I had a young family and a full-time job, and I got the sense, nobody ever said it, but I got the sense that everyone around me was probably thinking like, what is she doing? Why is she doing this? She's got 2 small kids, full-time career, mortgage. Why is she going to school at night, being a writer? Why is she staying up all night writing? And so when it became a book, it legitimized it for me, but it was also something I could hold up and say, I'm not crazy. It came to something, but I think also even if it came to nothing, even if it was never published, even if it was just finished, I would have felt that some sense of that same accomplishment, of it being completed and legitimizing my efforts. And some of that was my efforts out of the home, as opposed to just being solely focused on being a mom and raising my children. So that was definitely an expectation met. Um, my life didn't change too much after. I had a great publisher. I got to read a lot. It was great to have an audience. And it didn't change a lot until it won an award. And then I got an agent, and then it was republished more widely. Um, and that is not a normal experience. And I know how fortunate I am not only to have been recognized with some kind of award, but just to have it republished and have a publisher that was willing to resell the rights to a larger publisher because she knew it was best for me. So that was kind of my experience. And as I said, I know it's not the usual, but it certainly superseded any hope I had for myself in terms of what that book could mean for me. Yeah.
Can you just repeat the question?
Just wanting to know what expectations you had leading up to your first publication, what was met, what expectations weren't met, how was reality different from what you were thinking?
Okay, so I didn't have any expectations other than a little bit that thing of having the book with the books that I've been had been reading. But I don't think I had well, came to Vancouver and I hung out with ne'er-do-wells at Pulp Press back then. So they were publishing their own works and sort of revolutionary chapbooks and things like that. So that was, and I was a typesetter, so that was my understanding of publishing. But I wanted to write a book for readers, and my first book had a hook, so I was quite excited finishing it because I felt like it was going to be good. But I had no sense of the business side of it, and no sense that beyond the book, then there was going to be going out in public. I didn't even think about reviews. And so I was very pregnant when it came out. And my first review in the Globe and Mail was really vicious. And I was like, how can you be mean to a pregnant woman? So that's hard because writers are, we're alone in a room, and largely because we want to be. So having to switch gears was really a shock for me. My first book was very successful, and it later got great reviews in, New York Times and so forth. And that felt like candy. It felt like it was bad for me in a way. It wasn't nourishing. Um, and certainly the bad reviews, because I hadn't been prepared for those, they landed. And then in terms of how it changed my life, so I had never really gotten up and spoken in front of people before. So I remember going and looking at other writers and how they did it and thinking, okay, I'm never going to apologize before reading, because all the writers were doing that. I was like, I'm going to take the stage. But so I did learn how to do that. I also had young children, but I guess having the book felt like, yes, I was a writer now, and I could justify spending the time doing that rather than earning money, because it's, and I think I had the idea that my career was, I look back and I was naive, and I didn't think of it as a business. This will bleed into another question, but so yeah, I thought my career would just keep going like this, but it really went like that, and then sort of like that. So that was unusual about my journey. Is there a part I haven't answered?
No, you've been great. I think in time we.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
I didn't have a lot of expectations while writing my first novel about being published. That was certainly my hope. But what was more urgent for me, and Gurjinder mentioned this, was to finish it, just to write a novel. So I've my own. It's not very interesting, but a long backstory that had led me to think of myself as, in important ways, having failed myself, that I was a glib and superficial person, and I had never really made the effort to fulfill whatever my potential might be. And so in dedicating myself to that novel and completing it, I felt as though I was rewriting a story about myself. And my expectation was that on finishing it, I would feel better about myself for that reason. And that it met my expectations. Even before I found a publisher, I thought, well, this is the best you could do, Paul. You put yourself into that. You haven't cheated yourself the way you did for so long. The book had some lovely reviews and some lovely attention, and that was great. But I wasn't really that focused on it. I was working full time at the time and didn't plan for that to change, so I wasn't expecting any significant financial reward. My colleagues, I was teaching at Langara College, and my colleagues were tremendously supportive of my book when it came out. That was a surprise and very, very gratifying. It felt very generous. So that wasn't one of my expectations. It was a mild surprise that some of the people who are closest to me clearly felt a little bit awkward about my having published a novel. That was interesting.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to Gurjinder for a short reading. Gurjinder Basran is the award-winning author of 3 novels: Everything Was Goodbye, Someone You Love Is Gone, and Help, I'm Alive. Her groundbreaking debut novel, Everything Was Goodbye, was the winner of the Ethel Wilson Fiction Prize and was listed on many must-read lists, including Chatelaine Magazine's Book Club Pick and CBC's Writers to Read. An SFU Writer Studio alumna, Gurjinder is currently a mentor at the Vancouver Manuscript Intensive, VMI, and Gurjinder balances the demands of her career in connected technologies and her creative life as she embarks on writing her 4th novel. She lives in Delta with her family. Gurjinder.
Thanks. I'm going to break from the theme and not read from my first book because I feel like it got read so much. Pre-COVID, you got to go on book tours, and same with my second novel. And this third novel was published early this year. And I don't have a lot of opportunities to read aloud, so I'm going to take the opportunity today. So this is a short excerpt from Help, I'm Alive, about a boy named Anik who hasn't left his home for months. Most days, he can't even remember where he was going or what he wanted. He hadn't meant to stay locked away, but his room felt safe the way nothing else did. He couldn't explain away the fear, the anxiety, the way it crawled on him like 1,000 thin-legged spiders. There was no reason for it, and since there was no reason for it, there was no solution for why his life, without warning, had stalled. At first, he blamed it on the long winter, gray days and tin skies, but even with spring brushing into the frame, he still choked up like an engine turning over, coughing and sputtering, a failure to ignite. Pavan was the first to realize something was wrong. He wasn't excited about studying music, even though it used to be all he'd ever wanted. His grades slipped, and he flunked a semester and then didn't bother showing up for the next one. He stopped playing the piano in any meaningful way. He abandoned the classical standards and tuned his ear to the beautiful melancholy of minor chords. He'd strain his ear to the ivory to hear how a note seemed to puncture the air and disappear, the same way a spark of light dies in the dark. Sometimes he'd open the top of the piano so he could feel the vibration coil through his ear. Pavan, recognizing the signs of depression, took him to a doctor who prescribed antidepressants and therapy. Neither worked for him, not really. He remained numb, sick of himself, his anger turning inward, the beginning of his self-imposed exile. At first, he likened it to a meditation. Like the Buddha who sat under the Bodhi tree for 49 days in search of enlightenment, he too was on a spiritual quest. While sequestered, he read his mother's copy of The Art of Happiness by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and every other text about spirituality or religion on their bookcase. She had dozens of books on philosophy, monotheistic movements, and New Age basics like Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now. He devoured all of her self-help books from the classics like Man's Search for Meaning to the dumbed-down Chicken Soup for the Soul series. It was hard for him to believe that his mother had ever read them. She's a hard-shelled pragmatist, prone to mini meltdowns when things don't go her way. He couldn't reconcile her with someone who tried yoga, meditation, and mindfulness, who read theology, dogma, and New Age bestsellers. But there it was, bookshelves of proof of her longing for wisdom and purpose, which clearly he'd inherited. Hope. That's what they were both after. In so many of the books, gratitude and happiness, or happiness through gratitude, seemed to be the pursuit, the goal, and the measure. Anik found that hard to believe. Happiness is birthday cakes and Santa Claus, a word for children who don't know any better, or for people who are content with the con. But in his reading, he learned that happiness was not to be confused with pleasure, and that subtle distinction was what pulled Anik in and put him on a spiritual quest in earnest. Like all good quests, there must be a purpose, a profound cause, a question for the hero's journey. For him, they were one and the same. Why? With a thick black felt marker, he wrote a question mark on his wall, a reminder that everything starts with the question, not a question. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that. And just in the interest of time, I think I'll ask you a question. I'll let you answer it, and then I'll move on to
Sure.
the next reader. So after the publication of your first book, did you immediately start writing your second? And I think the more general question is, do you immediately start on the next project after finishing the last one?
I don't immediately start because I don't write all of the time. I think I immediately start thinking. I have ideas percolating, and they may percolate for years before I actually put a pen to paper. So I don't think I started writing the second book, actually writing for 4 years. But by the time I did start writing, it was almost done in my head. And so the same thing was true with Help I'm Alive. Once I did start writing it, it was done in a year and a half. So, and I think that's partly because being at work, I don't have a lot of time to write. So in my downtime, I'm just always thinking about writing and thinking about what comes next. So no, I don't start writing, but yes, I'm always thinking about writing. Yeah. Well, at least something has held my attention for long enough, like an idea or a character. There's somebody I want to follow. And so while I'm doing dishes or while I'm walking the dog or between meetings, I might be thinking about how they talk or how they move. And I just hang on to it until I have the time or just the motivation to sit down and do it. Mostly, I think anything worth remembering, I can remember. Like I don't map it out in terms of this is chapter 1. Like I have a general sense of this is where it's starting and there's movement. Usually I have the first quarter and then I just follow them.
Excellent. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Or if you want to read at the same time, we can do that. Yeah, I'm happy. Yeah. I'm easy. Okay. Did you want to add, does anybody want to add to this answer to this question about how quickly you get on the second book or the subsequent? I think that each time I've gotten on the next book before I found the publisher. Right. The previous one. Right.
Sorry, you hear that? They all heard it.
Okay. Okay. Well, how about we move on to, we'll hand it over to you. I'll ask you a new question.
Sure.
A new scary question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. But let me first, can I at least read your bio?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. Okay, Claudia Casper. Claudia is the author of the Mercy Journals, winner of the Philip K. Dick Award, and the bestseller The Reconstruction, and The Continuation of Love by Other Means, a finalist for the Ethel Wilson Fiction Prize. Her creative nonfiction has appeared in Drop Threads, edited by Carol Shields, and Marjorie Anderson and Geist magazine, among others. Her most recent short story, or short fiction, Walt's Head, was commissioned by Subterranean magazine. Claudia teaches speculative fiction at SFU's The Writer's Studio. Claudia, so my question for you is, when you were writing your first book, how present was the thought of publishing for you? Did you have it as a goal as you were writing? And if you didn't, did that change for your second book, the thought of publication and what you would do with the piece as you're writing it?
I think I did, because I remember feeling that the idea of my first book, which is a woman making a reconstruction of a human ancestor 3.5 million years old, and the connection between these women, and feeling like it was really hooky. Like, so I had a sense of urgency writing it. I didn't know enough to fantasize quite enough about the writing of it. I mean, the publishing of it. But once it was published, the second book was right of first refusal. So I thought it would get published for sure. This isn't the question about the second book, though, or is it?
It can be that question if you want.
So the because you're exposed with the first book, when you're writing the second book, you're aware of all the exposure that's about to happen. So it did change the writing for me, and sadly slowed it down a little. I think I became more perfectionist.
Right.
So yeah, you have a different sense of the audience. That being said, the thing that is pure in this activity we do is the relationship between the writer and the reader. And I hungered for that relationship with each book. You get so excited to have someone read your book, and then you don't really hear from people who've read your book, but that's where the exciting part really is. So does that answer the question?
That's great. Every answer is great.
Okay.
Does anybody want to build off that? Does anybody, do you want to build on the conversation of how present was the thought of publishing in the first book and the effects on the second book?
My first and second books were sort of written at the same time.
Yeah.
And the publishers divided them up into two books. So it was a unique situation. In a way, then my third book felt like a second book. And the pressure I felt there, and I remember telling you about this at the time, Andrew, was simply that I was teaching. I was teaching creative writing. And I wasn't having much success finding a publisher for the third book. And the pressure I felt was going on teaching creative writing while every publisher in the country was saying thanks, no thanks. And so I felt that pressure. So I was relieved when I published the third book. Andrew, I do have a reading that I would particularly like to share with this audience. It's not long.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Can I read understand why I want to?
Can I read your bio first?
Sure.
Yeah. I'm big on bios. I'm like Paul Headrick. Paul's first novel, That Tune Clutches My Heart, was a finalist for the Ethel Wilson Prize, the BC Book Prize, which is the BC Book Prize for fiction. His short story collection, The Doctrine of Affections, was a finalist for an Alberta Book Award. Stories from that collection appeared in the Malahat Review, the Antigonish Review, Event, and the Journey Prize anthology. His latest novel, Losing Shepherd, was published by Signature Editions this spring. Paul's literary studies took him to Montreal, Toronto, and London, England, before he resettled in his hometown of Vancouver. He taught English literature and creative writing for many years at Langara College, as well as giving short story workshops at writers' festivals from Denman Island to San Miguel de Allende in Mexico. He currently teaches a graduate novel and memoir workshop with SFU's The Writer's Studio. Paul.
I've got news, said Taylor. So, tell me. Taylor sighed. So, tell me. We were drinking at the Billy Bishop, the Legion down in Kitts Point, after a quiet walk along the beach. Quiet mainly because I'd lost the ability to hold a conversation. Earlier that week, I'd heard from yet another agent unwilling to take on my second novel attempt. It looked to be sinking as the first had. Taylor knew that, of course. The agency contacted me today, said Taylor. I've got a deal for an earlier encounter. Really? Wow, perfect timing. I'm sorry. You don't have to apologize for getting a deal. How big? Gordon. How big? How big? A lot. Wow, really? A lot. That's a lot. No question. Congratulations. Okay. All right, I'm sorry. Congratulations. It should be a lot. It's probably not enough. It's a great novel, really. Congratulations. I got up and gave him a hug. Thanks, he said. Look, in a few weeks, I'll be happy about this, probably, okay? It was his second novel. His first, Heart City, was startling good, a magnificent debut. Everyone agreed. An earlier encounter was another step, a knockout. Taylor had finished a beer quickly and was on to a second. He's twice my size and can hold his booze better. He turned sideways from the table to stretch out his legs, took another long swallow, and then he tried one of his inclusive smiles. I loved his smile, like everybody, but he couldn't sustain it. I'm not sure what to say. You don't need to say anything. I've got 2 points. The first is that I believe in you. Our careers might go at different paces. Maybe I'll do better with my next and again with the next, and you'll continue butting your head against the wall. Yeah, I know, not just the publication stuff, but aesthetically, what we agree on. But I'm very confident that you'll get there. You'll write something that we both know, we'll both know what it is. You'll write a great novel. Well, I'm beginning. Let me finish. I'm very confident, but I might be wrong. I could be. So the second thing I want to say is that I need you. I need you not to change. When you speak to me, you know that I know you're brilliant. You can't betray this in yourself. I excused myself and took a trip to the men's. You bridges and your sudden exits, said Taylor on my return. Really, only my mother and I had this habit of ducking out when the warmth got heavy. It's a little difficult for me. Okay, I accept what you say, thank you. But I'm finding it a bit hard right now to start up again. Attempt number 3. It's not offering itself to me. He turned around to face me and pulled his chair toward the table. I don't know, Gordon. Could you try something different? Is there something you could do? Hell, I don't know. A new desk, writing by hand. Maybe it's time, just an idea. Maybe you should move out. Think about it anyway. I'd been thinking. I was pushing my late 20s, but still on the boy-child subsidy, still no rent asked for, no hint of it, just one hard-to-pay expense, bare-bones honesty. I guess, to be fair, Mom would have preferred to forget the whole thing, but we were too late. Years earlier, we'd agreed that secrecy on such matters was soft and dumb, not that we'd actually discussed it. The point got reiterated with each of her flat announcements about articles accepted or rejected, her insistence that there be no emotional deal here, just professional markers of persistence. So I finished it. I sent off my first novel. I heard back. It's a no. I got another no, and I've sent it off. It's better. We'll see. I heard back. She didn't wince, made no sign, but still, her intense effort to remain impassive, so clear. I looked at my beer. If I moved out, I'd need to come up with rent money, less time for more working, less time for writing. Perhaps you're right. My writing will develop a new maturity if I alter my juvenile circumstances. I can see a phrase like that in The Inevitable Biography, the story of my early struggles on the way to literary triumph. I don't know what else to suggest. I was just thinking, like I said, something new. Something new, sure. Primal scream therapy, prayer, maybe self-mutilation. Could I do it? Certainly. I'd hack off a hand if I thought it would get me an agent and a deal.
Excellent, thank you. How about a process question? I've heard from some writers that over time they become better at knowing when an idea for a book will go the distance. That they no longer have to write large swaths of a piece before they can tell if it will sustain their interest for the time it will take to complete it. Is this true for you? When do you know if a project you're working on is good? And I'll open it up to others after. Yeah.
I feel it's good when I know how the narrator sounds. So unlike Gurjinder, I don't have much planned. Sometimes more, sometimes less. But when I'm confident in the narrator's voice, that's when I'm confident that I'm onto something.
I wrote short stories before novels, so for me, it's very clear whether something's a story or a novel. And I realize I don't know, I don't like being bored. So each novel has been a completely different journey. But yeah, I've never doubted that the next idea was the right one, because you kind of get it while you're working on the one you're working on. You're like, oh, that's what I'm going to write about next.
Mm.
And then if it stays, that is the one.
Ditto. Yeah, I think if it can hold your attention long enough, it's something. And so I've never had to throw anything out because it takes me so long just to get my bum in the chair to actually write that the idea has probably stayed in my head for 2-3 years.
Yeah, for me, because I don't write books with a clear theme or something to hold it all together, I'm really going very small, poem by poem. But I have been thinking about like what makes a poem something that I want to work on, and I've realized it's a few things. It's does something in it surprise me? Like, does it do something that like kind of startles me? Something I've never done before. Um, does it have something at stake? I've realized I can kind of like play and riff on like fun images and do like kind of pyrotechnics in a poem. But if something's not at stake, if it doesn't have a heart, I can't turn it into a good poem. And there was a third, but I'm forgetting it. So those two main things, yes.
Excellent. We can come back to it. We do have time for questions, and we do have time for a reading if Claudia wants to do your reading. Yeah. So how about we'll hand it over to you to do a reading. Well, if Raoul remembers his third thing, we'll come back to Raoul in the third thing, and then if you have any questions, we'll answer those questions.
Great. So this is from the first book, the opening chapter. Wider, please. Her jaw ached, but she obeyed, stretching her lips back further. She blinked up at his face. I could bite your fingers off. His eyes were a blurred blue concentration behind the saliva-spattered lenses of his glasses. Margaret imagined what he saw, a tiny, detailed oral world, particles of food being broken down by saliva, coffee stains near the gum line, fillings and caps and root canals that gave her a dental history unique enough to identify her body should she be disfigured in death. The inflamed, slippery tissue of the tender pink gums, and a floppy velvet tongue trying spasmodically not to get in the way, not to lay itself protectively over the areas he probed. Everything wet and glistening and red and imperfect. When he prodded with the curette, she could smell the foul little odors that sometimes escaped. The decay. She wondered if dentists still enjoyed kissing. Did they still want to Did they still want to slip their tongues into a lover's mouth and explore that wet, soft, private place? Did they still want to wind tongues like two snakes trying to penetrate each other's skins? Could dentists repress their daily observations of oral decay when it came to sex, to kissing? A narrow room with a low ceiling, the blue shadows of fir branches and lace curtains moving on the wall, a man's breath, his tongue moving supplely inside her mouth, his skin hot and surprisingly smooth against hers. That night no longer seemed real. It seemed implausible that those lips had touched the body sitting now in the dentist's chair, or that her fingertips had pressed on his skin, that those moments, finite, discrete, existed objectively in her past. It seemed implausible that the night was not a dream. She didn't know his last name or address. She only knew that his first name was Philip. You can close now. Dr. Aiden walked over to his cabinet and held an x-ray of her lower right jaw up to the light. He selected several tools from a cabinet drawer, and they clinked metallically as he dropped them onto a stainless steel tray. The throbbing pain had subsided as soon as she entered the front door of his office, as though the tooth sensed it was now in good hands. Margaret looked out the window. A silver-haired woman waited at a bus stop across the street. The woman stared vacantly into the road and took no notice of people joining her at the stop. That's probably good. The dentist thing ties up with the fossils of, because teeth and jaws are what remain most of the time from a corpse. So that goes on anyway.
That's excellent. Thank you. And to think we almost missed that reading. I know.
Let me say, I got one bad review from a man in Edmonton who was disgusted.
Oh, noted.
He was outraged.
Oh, Edmonton. Noted. Okay. Happy to open it up to audience questions if people feel brave enough to stretch. Barry? To write the next book. I'm just curious, I've written a book, I've got lots of for those who are for those for those who are streaming in, the question was, do bad reviews motivate you to write your second novel and to just show them your revenge novel?
Oh, you take the fantasizing about what might happen. It's definitely there. But that would be a bad reason to write a book, I think. Yeah. I did want to address though, Andrew, what your opening thing. There were so many things I wanted to talk about with it, but the thing is the writing, right? It's that it returns to that. The rest of it is like it's on top. It's like trimmings. Yeah, it is nice to have that badge to wear. I've had a book published. I've won a prize, but that's almost like armor out in the world. It's not the real thing. Real thing's the writing, right? Okay.
I think the bad reviews really do sting. I think it's just best not to read any reviews, anything. I've banned myself from Goodreads. I've changed my password so I can't read what any readers write about anything I write. I think you can't get too high on yourself when you have a good review, and you can't get too bad on yourself when you get a bad review, because it is subjective. It might just not be a book for them, because I do think if you have published something, especially if it's literary fiction or if it's in the lane that you're in, it passed the test. It's good enough to be published. And it takes a lot to get it published. So if someone doesn't like it or says some really mean things, and sometimes they do, and you wonder if they were like drunk when they wrote these things, you just realize it wasn't for them. And that's okay.
Yeah, I've mostly the reviews I've gotten have been pretty good with a few criticisms sprinkled in, and usually when there's criticism, I'm usually have the sense that, oh, I've thought of this already. I've already put this on myself. I know, like I'm basically the my worst critic, so I've already thought of everything I'm doing wrong in a poem or the things that are problematic. But I like I kind of like the idea of a revenge thing, but in the way of like, if they disliked something, to go really deep into it, like really amp up. Yeah, yeah. I think that would be a yeah. I mean, I wouldn't advise doing it for a full book, but I would maybe like write a poem that was like went really deep into what they criticized. This is a fun prompt.
That's great. Did you want to jump in with anything?
One of my favorite reviews was a critical review that I got. And I just liked it because it was really smart and it took the work seriously. And its criticisms were true to what I was trying to accomplish. And I liked it. It was rewarding to have been read that way. And it wasn't a mean review. but you know, it was certainly critical. And other critical reviews, I've just thought, well, it's stupid. You know, that people will say stupid things. People say stupid things in praise of the novel. But you know, for instance, what you read is beautiful, but it's also funny. And if somebody can't see the humor in that, or that there's an attempt to have a layer of humor, they're just not reading intelligently, right? So if they were to write and say something like, "There's an attempt at humor here, but it falls flat," you say, "Well, rats." I was hoping, you know. But if they don't notice that that's what you're attempting, they're just not trying in the review. And in that case, I just dismiss the review if they're not reading carefully. Yeah, and I've also read some positive reviews, but I've been kind of embarrassed. I don't want to share this with anybody because it's a very positive review, but it's not very literate.
Right.
And
right. We have time for maybe one quick question. We're in the final 5-minute stretch. If anybody has a pressing question that they would like to ask, I see Francis. Yeah, for those streaming in, any hacks for the external stuff to going back to the inward stuff for the writers?
You're running back to the internal stuff. Just not, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that by the time you're talking about your book, by the time you're doing the outward promotion, it's over for you. Like it's you probably haven't touched the work for a year by the time it's published. So you've already moved on. So you're already, even though we're here, we're probably already all doing some inner work on new writing.
if I understand your question correctly, I don't have much sympathy for the authors who can't find the time to get back to their next work because the pressure of all the reading requests and interviews.
So sad for them.
That's a rare situation.
I shouldn't have such a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's maybe not in all forms of promotion, but in the promotion that is actually sharing the work, I feel that it can connect back to the inner work in a sense that you're basically making that work alive in the air, and you're learning things by the way people are listening and like how it's coming across. And I feel like that can be almost the same thing as the inner work, if I don't know, if you frame it right in your
It's so
mind.
true, and it almost motivates you that the work that you did mattered with that book. So better get on the next one, because if it mattered to 5 people, 1 person, 5,000, it was worth it.
Excellent. Any final comments? Last thing, do you want?
have a question in there about advice.
Yeah. Anybody want to have one last piece of advice in these 2 minutes we have left?
Yeah, so
It's for the people streaming. Yeah, that's okay.
really sorry. So mine is, if I look back on my life and that first publication, I do wish I had known a little more about the business side of it, and that I'd understood that it was a business, and that I had let that inform kind of my creative planning for my life, because I didn't understand that part. And there's always a tension in this thing we do between the business and the art. So that is the thing to pay attention to, I guess.
I've been a judge a few times on different provincial literary contests, and among the submissions are people who have self-published. So you read a stack of books, major publishers, small publishers, self-publishers, and the ones that have self-published, I've routinely found that there's a lot of talent here and a lot of ability and interesting stories, and if I could have spoken to that person who was deciding to self-publish, I would have said, take another year. You know, your manuscript needs another year, and don't be in such a rush to publish. Just, you know, take another year, maybe 2. You're a talented writer. Your talent deserves that respect. Don't be in such a hurry.
Excellent.
Yeah, just as a quick aside, there was an article about Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah.
Mm-hmm.
It took him 10 years, that
Yeah.
song.
Yeah. Well, I think that's time. If we can have a final round of applause for Raoul, Gurjinder, Claudia, and Paul. Their books are available out in Iron Dog Books to purchase. They may have copies for sale here, and they'll certainly be happy to sign anything you give them, especially if it's a check for them. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for the lovely panel. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everybody.